Hello and welcome to the Vino Karma Project. My name is Amanda Layden. I am here today with the amazing TJ Douglas, who owns the Urban Grape in Boston. We are going to dig into all things wine and also some courageous conversations around race and equity and representation in the trade. So for those of you who don't know TJ, I'm going to introduce him. He has an enormous bio, so I'm going to give a little snippet of it. TJ is the founder and CEO of the Urban Grape. As the wine buyer, head salesperson, and architect of the progressive scale for the Urban Grape, TJ is directly responsible for the store's success. You are looking at the man. He has been profiled by the New York Times, Food and Wine, Imbibe, and a list of many other publications. And TJ has been named one of the 10 Black drink innovators to watch in 2020. TJ, welcome. I'm so happy to see you again. How are you?
Man, I am great. And I'm so happy to be on Vino Karma. Thanks so much for having me. I'm excited for our discussion today.
Me too. So for people who don't know you, can you just share with folks a little bit about your journey into the wine industry?
Yeah, absolutely. So I started off as a 14-year-old dishwasher in Vermont. Worked my way up through the ranks in McDonald's and then into the restaurant industry as a back waiter and a bartender, and ended up moving to Boston in 2000 when I was 21 or 22 years old. And that really opened up my eyes to hospitality, the beverage world, but also didn't allow a very traditional path for me to get into the wine industry. As we'll probably get in later to this, there wasn't many people in the industry that looked like me. There wasn't anyone that really approached me in terms of any kind of mentorship, and really no one that I could approach to ask for that. So I really had to take my own path on that. Worked in a few restaurants, ran a few wine programs, worked for Todd English, ran the Armani Cafe on Newbury Street, where I ended up writing a wine list in a progressive format to allow my very seasonal staff the opportunity to be able to sell wine and pair wine with food without really having to taste the wine or really knowing about it, which ultimately gave the guests at the table a better dining experience. Because when they asked a question about how is this wine, the server just didn't say, "Oh, it's really good." Right? They actually said, "Oh, well, we designed the wine list so that the wines at the top of the menu go with this because." And after that, I really just kept on learning about wine, tasting a lot about wine, or tasting a lot of wine. Worked for a distributor for a few years. Sold wine to mostly restaurants and some stores, and just I wasn't loving it at all, and I didn't have that instant gratification of being on the floor, on a restaurant floor, on the dining room floor. And so I really wanted to bring my hospitality background into retail. So my wife and I, Hadley, opened up the Urban Grape in 2010. And it's been a wave ever since. It's been absolutely insane, especially this past year and a half or so.
Yeah, let's talk a little bit about this past year and a half and what's gone on, not only with the pandemic, but also, certain things that happened in America, particularly with the murder of George Floyd in May. How has this year been for you as a owner of a shop that sells alcohol? And how has it been for you just personally as a person of color in the United States?
Yeah, so I mean, this year, and the word pivot has been used a lot this year in really every industry and even in people's personal lives, right? I'd like to say that we hit our pivot in March, and then after that, we've really just reimagined what the Urban Grape is and what it can be. It's kind of twofold. COVID is one. As you mentioned, we are an alcohol retail business, and alcohol retail business, at the detriment to most of our friends in the restaurant side, is really up right now because people are, if they're not drinking more, they're just drinking more at home because people aren't, dining out. And so we've been absolutely insane from from March up. And then after George Floyd's murder and the protests that happened here in Boston, it's interesting. I've been in this business now for almost 25 years. And it was really on June 1st, the world started looking at me as a black wine guy.
Yeah.
Right. And they're like, oh, wow, you're like, oh, well, yeah, you are a black owned business. Like I've never, you're just TJ, right? You're not a black man in the wine trade or a black general manager or a black salesperson. You're just TJ, and yeah, I'll buy some wine from you. And that all changed. And so there was a really big focus, especially on the media side, of being black in the wine industry. And at first it was overwhelming, and I was very standoffish at first, just because I'm like, wait, now you're going to pay attention to me,
Right. Right.
and you're only talking to me because I am a man of color, not because we're one of the top rated wine shops in the country, right? And then I needed to kind of step back and say, you know what? People are listening. Their eyes are open, their ears are open, their hearts are open, their wallets are open. Who knows how long this is going to be. And so let's take this opportunity and use our platform and really do some good for our community, both here in Boston and beyond. And since then, you've mentioned some of the publications, like, we were mentioned in the New York Times, and it's really interesting about being black in the wine industry and how there aren't many of us in here. And I don't want to jump ahead on any of the questions you may have planned.
No, keep going.
But it was it was crazy. On the night of May 30th, when the protest, May 30th or 31st, protest in Boston, Hadley and I were sitting on our couch in, Jamaica Plain. Mm-hmm. So we're about 5 miles from the store in the South End in Boston. And we're watching, the protests happening, and then everyone go home. And then the riots started happening, the vandalism, not from the peaceful protesters, but from people, coming from outside of the city and just stealing and breaking windows. And, the next morning at about, 6 a.m., we got a text message from a neighbor who lives across the street from the Urban Grape, and it was a picture of our broken window. And so I'm like, I'm like, what's going to happen? But like, you know what? We have insurance. It's not, it's not about anything about us right now. So, and this is only a story I've only told a couple of people. So hopefully it's just you and I having this conversation right now. But I go into the Urban Grape. I drive in. I remember I'm wearing like Patagonia camoed like cargo shorts, like some Air Force Ones, and maybe like my Urban Grape pink progressively rosé t-shirt. And I go into the store, and the alarm was not on, or it was on, but it wasn't ringing until I put my head through the glass window to check it out. I opened the door, the alarm went off. And I couldn't get the alarm off. And at the same time, at home, Hadley was receiving a phone call from our security company saying that she needs to give the password in order for them to turn off the alarm and to not call the cops. And at the time, I was coming out of the garage, and my phone wasn't, on getting any service. And she begged the woman from ADT not to call the cops. She's like, look, like the vibe in the city right now, it's crazy. And what's the vibe in our world is crazy right now. And, like we have for those of you listening, you might not know me, but like, I'm 6'3" and 265 pounds, maybe a little heavier after COVID now, but I'm a big dude. And so my wife explained that. She's like, please, my husband's a black man. If the cops go into that shop and see a large black man standing in a broken in liquor store, 12 hours after Black Lives Matter protest, I don't want whatever's going to happen to him. And she was begging. The woman was like, ma'am, I had to call the cops. I was able to get the alarm off. And the woman said, oh, you know what? We were just able to, I saw that the alarm was deactivated. And so the cops have been called off. And she said, thank you so much. And the woman from the security company, Amanda, said, hey, ma'am, And she started crying. She goes, "I am so sorry that I just put you through that." The woman from the security
Wow.
company. And so in the meantime, I had no idea, right? But me being a Black man going into my own business, I, of course, already had my business card, my driver's license in my pocket so that when the cops came in, I could hand that to them. And I shouldn't have had to do that.
Yeah.
This
It's
is my business. So
that, I mean, even that story like chokes me
mm,
up a little bit. It's like, here we are, and now it's now 2021, but here you were, in 2020. And that those are the things that first thing is going through your wife's head. And it's unfathomable in this day and age. And it's heart-wrenching. It's heart-wrenching that that's what you as a business owner are even contemplating in your own shop. And not to mention, thinking through like what has happened. Is anybody even in the shop? Is the shop okay? Are people okay? Like, you had no idea what you were walking into. So thank you for sharing that. I recall, because at the time my husband and I were also living in Boston, and we were patrons of yours at the Urban Grape. And I recall the email that came out. It must have been that day or the day after you were broken into. And there were a lot of things going on in Boston. Other restaurants were broken. Restaurants were broken into. Other places were broken into downtown. And the thing that struck with me about that email, and I think I still have it because I felt like it was so poignant in terms of you leveraging your voice as a business owner, was just, I remember you saying something to the effect of, "It's just glass, it's not bodies. Like, everybody here is safe."
yeah, yeah. And that came from, that was on June 1st, and we put something out. I think we put something out on Instagram, and half the people were saying, "I'm so sorry, your family's been through this. Like, there needs to be so much change. I can't imagine the fear. I hope everyone's safe." And then the other half of people were like, "Hey, bro, sorry about your window." And that's when we put that out, saying a window is not a life.
Mm-hmm.
you know, and a window's not a life. It was broken glass. It got fixed eventually, and insurance covered some stuff. Some stuff came out of pocket, but everyone's still alive, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, a window is not a life, and it wasn't the protesters, and I'm glad you really pointed that out just now. Those people were asleep in bed already.
Yeah.
It was like the kids that broke into the store, they were kids, and they also broke into CVS with a sledgehammer. And they were looking for cash, and they took the opportunity with law enforcement being on the other side of the city to try to get some cash. That's it.
Mm-hmm.
And so it wasn't about the broken window. It's like, what were people marching for? And then the people that were angry and starting to riot, not for theft, or are fed up with with what was going on and the safety, and people have had enough. And it wasn't the right way to handle it. But we've gotten through that part, and now the dialogue is continuing, which has to happen.
Somebody else said it, and I don't even remember who it was, but thinking about this kind of confluence of things which happened at this period of time in May and in June, with George Floyd, and then people are sitting at home, not able to go anywhere, and drinking more wine than they usually would. And however, we had this group of people at home in America who were stuck. So we're watching what Black people have been experiencing for 400 years in this country. And I would like to, I think for myself, watching that, I was like, I hope this isn't just a moment in time. I hope that what we're starting to recognize is that we need to shift the landscape seriously in this country, and we need to be leveraging and bringing other people up and understanding their experience to make change. I don't know what your thought is now as the conversation is progressing. If you feel that hopefully, if let's hope that your shop is never broken into again and you're never having to stand there again, but hopefully, those things don't go through your mind anymore, where you're thinking, I have my business card, I hope I'm safe, I have my hands up, I'm standing here, I don't know. Do you feel that things are getting better?
I I think there's the dialogue, and I think some people are talking about it more. Some people have stopped talking about it altogether, right? Like protests have happened before. People have been, killed before, and because of the color of their skin, or their sexual preference, or their religious preference, right? Or anything. And this is not new. I think because of media and social media, that everything was visible to everyone trapped at home in real time. And I think that that's what's different from, the 1960s or the 1980s or the 1990s, is that everything's happening right now. Do I feel that I still don't have to, have my ID on me at every single moment? Absolutely not, right? Like I never leave the house without my wallet, ever. Where my wife can walk out and she's like, oh yeah, I think she drove with an expired license for like 6 months. She's like, oh, I'll get it done tomorrow. I'm like, I would never drive why would I give someone a reason, right?
Yeah.
And so, my boys are 12 and 14 years old, and they're past the cute little stage. Well, my 12-year-old's still a little cute, but they're past that stage now. They're young Black men,
Yeah.
and so and I'm sure you've had friends that have told you this before, you've read about it. It's like I know if there's a cop behind me, or I always look up and my wife's like, how do you see them? I'm like, well, because I have to. It's self-preservation, And so I'm talking about this more. And I think to really get into the answer of your question, is not only is the dialogue happening among the white community, but I think the dialogue is happening amongst the Black community as well, because there is this moment in time where people are listening to us. And so we're just like, yeah, we've always been this way, but now we're talking about it, and we're not going to stop talking about it. That's very important. And, we're using our platform of social media and our presence in our community to continue that conversation.
Yeah, super important. I mean, that's also the platform of Vino Karma, right? We bring people together over food and wine with the goal of creating community connection and change. And part of it is leveraging underrepresented voices, be it shop owners or winemakers or tastemakers in a way. So let's talk a little bit about the wine industry.
This is a wine conversation, right?
Well, I don't know. We can make the conversation whatever we want it to be. We could be here all day. Like I could pop a couple bottles and so, to me, as I came from the wine trade, and there were certain things that I didn't recognize about it. I mean, I recognized certain things about it, but I knew that the wine industry was pretty elitist when I was in it. And, what have you experienced, and how are you, I know with your progressive drinking, you've started to break down some of the barriers in terms of people not only approaching wine, but also in the industry itself. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Well, I think it's viewed as elitist because that's how it's marketed, right? In countries where there's farmers, where they're not driving around in big cars and have massive houses, but they're growing wine grapes. Wine is a part of their culture, right? You have wine on the table, you have wine on the table, right? Your livestock is on the table, right? And that's where wine comes from, right? What makes a wine $1,000 a bottle is because they have a $40 million tasting room that has to pay for that $1,000 wine. And then they can charge because then they do want to make it, elitist, or, wine for a certain caste, if you will, right? Breaking down barriers for wine, I think really is coming from the marketing aspect, right? So my guy back there, Andre Houston Mack, you have his OPP Pinot Noir, which has always been one of our biggest sellers. It's I believe a 3R on our progressive scale on our book, Drink Progressively. He didn't get into the wine business because he's Black. He got into the wine business because he loves wine, and he loves drinking, and he loves food pairing. But as of late, he is kind of one of the few faces that represents Black people in wine, right? But again, it's kind of like me, right? Like I've always been in it, but now it's visible. What we're trying to do, what we've been doing over the last probably few years, is on our website, we have this a producers of color section, just like we also have women in wine or biodynamic or minimal intervention, whatever, to promote, to really give the non-older white man winemaker, winery owner a specific spotlight on our website and on our shelf. We call it out. The problem is, Amanda, is that over the years, there haven't been that many Black producers that we've had the availability to bring into Massachusetts. If my memory serves me right, I think Andre was the first and the only for a few years that we were able to get into Massachusetts. But now I've been able to bring in Theopolis Vineyards. I've been able to bring in Lafette Rosé. I'm working with some other people bringing in Chosen Wines. McBride Sisters is now in Mass, and it's giving them exposure. And why that's important, going back to, it's perceived as elitist because that's how it's marketed. Well, now if you have these faces of Black men and women behind these Black-owned brands or Black farmed brands or Black-made brands, that's going to attract not a different, but a greater clientele, a larger clientele. It's going to say, wait a second, that person looks like me. I'm a drinker. Wine is kind of marketed this way to me, but I really want to try Pinot Noir and, not Moscato. But I want like this because they feel that, Black people are marketed to with sweeter wines, right? It's like, I'm sorry, but sweet wines, I started drinking sweet wines when I first started getting into wine, right? You don't start drinking double black espressos. You start with a Dunkies iced coffee, which chills your palate and covers your taste buds, right? You got a bunch of, malolactic cream, a bunch of, sugar to it. And you're like, yeah, I love coffee. That's not coffee, right? That's a Dunkies iced coffee milkshake, right? When you get into a double espresso, so if you market it a different way and people can see that someone is like them, they're going to get exposure to that. So with that being said, this past year and a half or so, and especially since June, our clientele of non-white customers has increased because they've sought us out, and we've been able to bring in more wines to do that. But then it's also increased our sales and capability of Black-owned brands because all of our white customers, which most of our customers are white, just because of where we live, have been really opening up their palates and their wallets and really wanting to, explore and support not only Urban Grape, but those Black-owned brands, because they've never had them before. And when you were on the street, which is, when we were on the street selling wines as salespeople, right? It's hard to sell wine, but we used to have a saying, it's like, just get it in their glass. Yeah. Right? If you put it in their glass, if you get someone to taste it, they're going to buy it and put it in their program. If you get someone to taste Miss Theodore Lee's Petite Syrah from Yorkville, they're going to buy it. But Miss Theo's never had that opportunity, right? Wow. So I don't want to go on too long. I know that's a very long one question, but
I think it's great because you bring up so many different things. And one is people seeing themselves in a career path they didn't know existed. It's like, the most public domain example of the biggest example of that in the public domain right now is Kamala Harris, right? Little girls seeing themselves in the path where, I was pretty convinced in my lifetime, I was not going to see a female president or vice president. And so it's like seeing that path to what you can believe, letting Black and brown children see themselves in an industry which has marketed itself as elitist is super important, and females as well. One of the things that I'm really passionate about is not only, supporting underrepresented voices, but also breaking down the established systems in corporate America, in the wine industry, as well as the stereotypes that exist. Are there still some stereotypes that exist about, you think, about yourself in the industry, or things that you just wish would go away today?
Yeah, I think one of the stereotypes is that, people of color like cheap and sweet, But that's kind of back to my analogy of Dunkin's iced coffee. It's like it's an untrained palate because they haven't had the exposure, because there might not have been a wine shop in their neighborhood, right? There might just be like a bodega that only sells, mass produced, capitalized wines that is only sold to that wine. Well, because the distributor doesn't have the portfolio manager and the sales manager say, hey, go bring, some Burgundy to this place, right? But no, you're going to do like big drops of, red Moscato, which I didn't know existed, right? And I think that's a stereotype that like Black people would have a different palate than a white person. And I think we have different terminology from our experience, our tasting experiences, but all of our palates are the same, right? The experience that we have and taking what we're feeling and smelling and tasting and turning it into a word, right? A descriptor. So that's one stereotype. Another stereotype is that, and this is for the industry, that wine needs to be expensive to be quality and to have a story. And that stereotype and also that perception is what makes it and marketed it as an elite industry, right? Or an elite offering. Like we don't have to drink wine, right? A $12 wine is a luxury product. You don't have to drink wine, right? We can make a joke like, yeah, we do, but and we do, but you don't have to drink that. But most people in the world drink some kind of fermented beverage, right? It's the wine that makes that fermented beverage expensive, because that fermented beverage works on tourism. It works on with vacations. It works with business dinners, right? And so all of these places very limits, right? If you are growing up in an underdeveloped area of the world, chances are your family's not going on holiday to the south of France. And so if you're not going to have that exposure, you might have blinders on and might not realize that wine is for you. And so when I mentioned my untraditional path that I had to take, I didn't know there were sommeliers, right? Or I didn't know that there were sommelier classes, because like I wasn't raised that way. I didn't grow up with wine on my table. We couldn't afford it. And with the path that I took, it was asking a ton of questions when I was a buyer. It was tasting nonstop. It was buying the cheap wines that I could afford at that time. And then eventually it was the travel from the hospitality industry that allowed me to go stand in a vineyard in South Africa or go pick grapes in Washington, right? And then it absolutely opened up my eyes. So I don't want to jump ahead, but I want to talk about our award program because it kind of fits in line.
Yeah. Can you share a little bit more about that? That would be amazing. I would love to hear more about it.
Yeah. So, this kind of ties right back into stereotypes, but, if we think that, Black and brown people don't drink wine, it's that Black and brown people don't have access to wine. And so as a business owner and a seller of wine, when I wanted to have a more diverse company, right? Visually diverse as well. And it's really hard. There weren't Black people that were applying for positions other than delivery or laborer positions, right? There weren't Black people that were applying for floor positions if we put an ad out, or managerial positions whatsoever. And because they might not have had exposure to wine. And it got really tough. We did this about 5 years ago. We started this, and it was just really tough. And I got just like selfish. I'm like, I don't want to be the only one that looks like me in my own store, right? And I don't want customers walking by, and if I'm not there, they're just only seeing, younger white people work in the store, right? And it's nothing against the younger white people. Like, they're great people. It's just that if someone that doesn't look like them walks by and only sees them, there might not be an opportunity to come in and give them the experience and get it in the glass for them, right? And so I was getting tired of not having people apply for the jobs that I needed positions filled for. So it took a couple of years. And about 18 months, 20 months ago, Hadley and I approached Boston University, and we said, "Hey, you know what? We want to come up with this program where it's just a three-pronged approach to education, to paid internships, and then ongoing mentorships." And Boston University is the education side, and it's actually this course that I went through called the Elizabeth Bishop School, and this Elizabeth Bishop School is actually taught by two masters of wines, and it's a 4-level 1-year course. And the reason this is important is because if someone can go into this course tuition free, Urban Grape pays for it, tuition free for the year, they'll be educated so that when now they're attractive to me, if they apply for a position, they have the confidence to apply for a position at Urban Grape. At that same time, they're working on 3 sides of the business that I've come from, 4 months each: retail at the Urban Grape, wholesale at MS Walker, and then on-premise restaurants, front of the house, for Tiffany Faison's Big Art Hospitality. And like I'm sure you know her, she's amazing. Yes. People. And this is, it's paid internship where everyone's in the front of the house, right? Because in distribution, all the Black and brown people work in warehouse, right? In restaurants, most, at least in Boston, work as dishwashers and busboys and barbacks. Right. But they're not the wine steward. They're not the bar manager. They're not the head server. And so this needs to change. And at the same time, it's ongoing mentorship. So this program, we were able to financially start because of the support of our community after June 1st to start the Urban Grape Wine Studies Award for students of color. And we've raised so much money, Amanda, in the first couple of months of this programming, really kicking off in the end of June of 2020, that Boston University said, "Hey, you know what? How do you feel about putting 2 students through this program?" And we said, "Yeah." So it's about $8,000 per student per year, and we've raised enough money. We're at about $175,000 since.
Wow.
And we're going to endow the fund at $200,000, which puts 2 students through this program for life. So every single year in perpetuity, we're putting 2 students through this program, and Tiffany and the Shaw family at MS Walker and Hadley and I through Urban Grape have also made an agreement that we're going to continue to do this because this is what all of our industries need. And so our first student, who is a 40 plus Black Latinx queer woman, started in September. And then we have another Black woman who actually just started with us in the end of January. And so now, so one came through Urban Grape, now one's at Urban Grape, and the other one is at distribution. And This is what changed. She was on a sales call with education with everyone. And she's like, "Here's an amazing company," right? Like MS Walker is an amazing company. And she's like, "This is why I'm here. And I know this is tough," because she was doing she was on a call. And she said, "I felt like the lone vanilla bean in a carton of vanilla ice cream." Right. And, we mentioned that to the heads, and they're like, "Yes, this is why we're doing this." She's like, "This is unique." And they're a great company that's been around for generations. But then you take that company and you cookie cut it into any other industry in corporate America. Yeah. And it's right. So the change needs to happen. And we really needed to make that change ourselves.
I love that so much. And kudos to you for, taking a stand and also aligning with other folks in the industry, because I feel like this industry is so siloed, not only in the way that it's structured from the 3-tier system and everything else, but voices need to come together and need to link arms to say, we're going to be the change, and this is how we're going to do it. So for people who are listening and watching this, to and watching this, how can they get involved to support that initiative?
So to support the Urban Grape Wine Studies Award for Students of Color initiative, they can go right to Boston University and search for us and make a donation right there. And not sure when this is going to be airing, but for the first quarter, we have a donor matching up to $20,000 for every single donation. So
wow.
That's pretty huge. So they can go for there, but in their own communities, wherever they are in the world, is reach out to their wine shops that they have a relationship with, reach out to their restaurants, their independent restaurants that they have relationships with, and start a conversation and use us as a reference, right? Say, hey,
Wow.
here in Boston, there's this great shop, and they're building community through beverage this way. And it's really interesting. Like we chose MS Walker because we have such a great relationship, and they want to make change not only for themselves but for the industry as a whole, because they have such a presence and a say in this industry that if they're doing it, other people are going to follow suit. But there's other people that are like, I think we're kind of fine the way that we are. So I think you have to break down these barriers by being extremely vocal, right? And if there aren't any Black-owned wine brands that are on the store shelf, ask the manager at the store, well, why not, right?
Mm-hmm.
Go to Urban Grape's website. They carry all these. Can you guys get some of these, right? Because Urban Grape can't get it to us, right? Or go and have a conversation with the chef owner and say, hey, what are your diversity programs here? Everyone is kind of white that works here. Like everyone is willing to have that conversation, and the person that's going to find that as offensive, they're kind of lost anyways, right? But so many people, do you agree with that? Like so many people want to help, but so many people are just gonna, right? Like, sorry about your window, dude, right? Like that's it. But I think there's more people that have their ears and hearts and eyes open right now. The problem is that there's not here's what you do to fix it. But even if it's just us as a wine drinking community, we have so much power, right? If you, and now I'm talking to the listeners here, if you as the drinker or you as the eater don't find that the places that you're patronizing support, equal opportunities and equity in our world, stop spending your money there, because there are so many people out there that are taking the money out of their own bank accounts to help make change.
Well, yeah. And, brands who aren't thinking right now about who's making decisions in their organizations and how that trickles down to consumers, they are way behind, because cancel culture is real, unfortunately. Fortunately for some and unfortunately for others. And, consumers, I think even more, I was talking to somebody earlier this week, and I think it's something like the Black community now has $1 trillion worth of buying power. And thinking about what does that mean when brands actually take that seriously and start to make sure that they're marrying the customer experience with the employee experience, with the buyer's experience, with the decision maker's experience. So I think it's going to be really fascinating to see what happens with big brands over the next, call it year or two, and how they start to shift. What other things do you think need to happen in the industry, or one or two steps that the industry needs to take to have more, and I won't say true equity and representation, because as you said, that's going to take, I don't know, probably another 100 years, unfortunately, to actually happen. But what do you think needs to happen? What steps need to be taken in order to have more equity and representation?
I think the first step on all sides, like in Massachusetts, we're on a 3-tier system, right? So distributor, retail, restaurant, and then the most important person, the consumer. Social media is such a powerful tool in real time, and it has a voice, and you need to be like, we've always run our company very transparently, right? I think companies, consumers, and the companies like businesses, retailers and restaurants, they need to be transparent, and they need to be vulnerable and put themselves out there and say, this is what we're doing. We might not have done it this way before, but we're changing now. And these are the steps that we're taking as a company. And thank you for your business, right? I think that's one step. And then the second step is for people like me, who is a reseller of wine. So I can't import directly. I have to buy it from a distributor. For me, it is for years, I've been reaching out to these small Black-owned and like women-owned or LGBTQ-owned brands and saying, hey, I really want to, support your brand. Can I make some introductions? And there were a lot of like no callbacks or saying, you know what, we've tried this before, but they said, we weren't the right fit for them. And now they're finding that people are making room for them. So the answer to the second part of that, Amanda, is for me, I stayed on top of them and I made introductions, right? And I took the first step and I said, look, I can't bring you in, but send me some samples because one, if it's not good, I'm not going to carry you, but I will make an introduction to you, right? And so what I've done, I've made some introductions to some great smaller importers here in Massachusetts, which then provides them the path, which then I can carry, which gives me access, which then I can sell to the consumers and they get more money. The consumer gets more wine to buy. I get to support both sides and the industry starts looking differently organically.
That's great. It's interesting you say that because as people are learning more about Vino Karma, you and Hadley were kind enough to support Vino Karma. And in reverse, we supported you by sending folks your way to buy a few winemakers brands this summer when I interviewed Ibram X. Kendi. And people are finding out what I'm trying to do in the industry, what Vino Karma is trying to do. And I'm getting DMs. I got a DM yesterday from somebody saying, hey, I saw you drank this wine the other day. Can you stop supporting this person because he's a known misogynist in the industry? And I was like, whoa. I was like, okay, well, thank you. Because I won't then drink his brands anymore. I won't drink his wine because that's one of the things that I'm also very passionate about is having women be in positions as well of power or decision-making power, particularly in this industry. I myself also experienced sexual harassment in the industry. And it's something that we saw with the New York Times expose that came out about the quartermaster sommeliers back in, I think it was November. We saw the things that are still rife in this trade that have to stop. So I'm glad that you said that because social media is everything and it is powerful. And now finally people are starting to come up and stand up and say, hey, this has to stop and that has to stop and support these people over here and stop supporting those folks over there.
Again, it's, and I'm sorry that you've experienced that in your life. And, you're probably talking about one experience, but it's probably happened 1,000 times that you've just brushed off and you put some armor on, right? And so I'm sorry that you've gone through that. And with the equity, doesn't matter like your skin color, right? There needs to be equity in this, and these issues, whether it's discrimination based on race or sexuality or height or weight or whatever, right? That happens in every single industry. So, we can kind of cookie cut, not a fix all, but it's the same situation. So, with the New York Times article, I read it and I'm like, I'm so sorry. These women, a couple of them, I know not well, but I know them, and I've been on some Zooms with them before this came out. I'm like, oh my God, but then I look back and I'm like, of course this has happened, right? I mean, they're young women and they are in positions where the person that is going to give them more opportunity is an older white male with power, right? And I'm like, this happened, and and I know that they've changed around the structure of the court here in the United States. Two of my friends, two Boston guys, are actually now new board members because they are looking at changing the whole thing so that this doesn't happen again. I don't know much about the Court of Master Sommeliers, just because I'm not a sommelier. I didn't take that path at all. But it's the victim. It's not their fault. And you can't use the excuse of like, oh well, we were drinking or like whatever. It shouldn't happen. It shouldn't happen. The women, brown and black people, LGBTQ community, it's so unfortunate that we have to protect ourselves from the predators and the predators of discriminatory actions.
Yeah.
You know,
I want to see this industry shift so much and blow up the seats of power so that other people step in. So I know I don't want to take up too much more of your time, but I do have a couple of other questions. One is, are there any brands or winemakers, brewers, distillers that you're super excited about right now that you'd love to talk to our community about?
Yeah. So as I mentioned, I've been able to facilitate some of these brands coming into Massachusetts, and hopefully from what they've seen as the owner, but also as the importer, that there's more opportunity to sell these wines in other markets, right? So I love Theopolis Vineyards. So Miss Theodora Lee, she's an attorney by day, and then she's the farmer, the winemaker, the brand owner, the winery owner, and she's just totally badass. Unfortunately, some of these people that I've met this year over Zoom, it's only been over Zoom, because of COVID. So like, I'm not hopping on a plane and going to California. Love that. We're hopefully coming into Massachusetts, Bodkin wines. And those are great. There's sparkling, there's white, there's reds. Looking for Bodkin, Bodkin. Really looking forward to those. We're in the process of bringing in Chosen family wines from Oregon. With these guys, it's really interesting because, and maybe this is a conversation for another time, but so many of these Black-owned brands that are starting out are coming from celebrities. They have so much serious love of wine, and they kind of are pushed aside because they're celebrities. But this is that are Black, right? It's like this was their opportunity to get into wine because they weren't in finance. Right? They didn't own, 75% of all the cattle in Montana and then go build a $100 million winery, right? They made their money from being famous, right? And it's not their fault, but they've used that money to start wine brands and to start wineries. And they're serious wines that happen to be owned by athletes, that happen to be brands owned by, one of the best R&B singers of all time. Right. And so I'm really excited about bringing these in, but this is where it's starting right now. We're getting more of these brands in before we can get more than one case of Krista Scruggs's wines from Vermont, because she only makes 100 cases, right? So in order for that to get distributed around the world, it's very limited. And then a great grower, she's a farmer, to really look out for is Brene Royal. You can follow her at _Cabernet on Instagram. She's like one of the dopest people that I've ever met. And she has her hands in a lot of things, but she's the head farmer, the head rancher for Monte Rosso Vineyard, which is one of the most well-established and famous vineyards in the United States. And that's her vineyard that she's farming for people. So I think watch where some of the fruit that she's picking for people would be great. But, if we had this conversation 6 months from now or a year from now, maybe I can, give you 40 brands.
Well, I really appreciate you having this conversation with me today and sharing your knowledge, your love of the industry, and also just your perspective, it being in the wine trade and having been in the trade for so long. So I really appreciate you. And thank you for all that you do and all that you're doing for the community. For those folks that are in Boston, please go out there and support TJ and Hadley Douglas of the Urban Grape. And for everybody watching, please continue to go out there and create change one sip at a time. Thank you so much.